Benjamin dropped the empty tray of oranges and knelt beside the grave. The ground was cool under his palms. "Mama," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I miss you." "I'm trying, Mama, but it's hard, too hard." The tears came then, hot and uncontrollable. He curled up on the grave, clutching the dry earth as if it could somehow bring his mother back to him. "I don't know why God took you and Papa away from me," he sobbed. "Auntie Enkay does not like me. She beats me, Mama. She starves me. I don't want to stay with her again, I want to come and meet you." 8-year-old Benjamin staggered barefoot along the narrow road, balancing a tray of oranges on his small head. His tiny feet were caked in red dust, and his oversized shorts clung to his skinny frame, drenched with sweat. His heart was heavy, his stomach empty, and tears threatened to spill from his tired eyes. But he knew better than to stop. Auntie Enkay's harsh voice rang in his head. "Benji, if you come back without selling everything, you go chop cane tire." Benjamin's stomach turned, not from hunger this time, but from the fear of her whip. Her words stung worse than the beatings she gave him. Ever since his parents had died, she had taken him in, not out of love, but out of some twisted sense of obligation. Every day since then, he had hawked oranges from dawn till dusk, dragging his tired little legs across the town. He paused briefly under the shade of a withered mango tree, the only comfort he could find from the cruel heat. With trembling fingers, he wiped the sweat off his forehead, leaving streaks of dirt on his pale, tear-streaked face. The tray on his head felt like a mountain crushing him, but he knew he had no choice. A woman passed by, her wrapper tied around her waist, and glanced at him. For a moment, Benjamin thought she might pity him enough to buy an orange. But she simply shook her head and hurried away. "Oranges for sale. Sweet oranges." His voice was weak, barely louder than a whisper. No one stopped. The streets were too busy, filled with the hum of life that Benjamin no longer felt a part of. The memories of his parents haunted him with every step. His father, a carpenter, had been his hero. Benjamin used to sit by his side in the evenings, watching him carve wood into beautiful shapes. His deep voice, filled with laughter, still echoed in his mind. But one fateful day, a cough that refused to stop took him away, leaving Benjamin and his mother alone. His mother, oh his sweet mother, had been his anchor. She had worked tirelessly, selling akara at the market to ensure he had food to eat and a chance to attend school. He remembered her warm embrace, the songs she sang to him at night, and the smell of fried beans that clung to her clothes. But life had been cruel to her too. Just a year after his father's death, she had fallen sick. Benjamin watched helplessly as she grew weaker and weaker, her once vibrant eyes dimming until they closed forever. He hadn't cried the day she was buried. No, he had been too shocked, too broken to shed tears. But now, every tear he hadn't cried then seemed to flow freely, mixing with the sweat and dirt on his face as he trudged along the road. "Sweet oranges for sale," he called again, his voice cracking. A man with a bicycle finally stopped and handed him a crumpled naira note in exchange for 3 oranges. "Oh, thank you, sir," Benjamin whispered, bowing slightly. But the man didn't even look at him. The sun was sinking lower in the sky when he finally sold the last orange. Relief washed over him, but it was short-lived. He knew the money he had earned would never be enough for Auntie Enkay. She would still find something to complain about, still find an excuse to punish him. He began the long walk home, his legs heavy with exhaustion. As he passed the cemetery at the edge of the town, his steps faltered. His mother's grave was there. He didn't plan to stop, he knew Auntie Enkay would be furious if he returned late. But his heart ached too much to keep walking. Something inside him pulled him toward the small, unmarked mound of earth where she rested. Benjamin dropped the empty tray and knelt beside the grave. The ground was cool under his palms. "Mama," he whispered, his voice trembling. I miss you. I'm trying, Mama, but it's hard, too hard. The tears came then, hot and uncontrollable. He curled up on the grave, clutching the dry earth as if it could somehow bring her back to him. I don't know why God took you and Papa away from me, he sobbed. Auntie Enkay does not like me. She beats me, Mama. She starves me. I don't want to stay with her again, I want to come and meet you. The wind picked up slightly, blowing the leaves of the nearby trees. To Benjamin, it felt like a faint caress, as if his mother's spirit was trying to comfort him. He closed his eyes, his thin frame trembling with every breath. The world around him seemed to fade away as he imagined her voice, her laughter, her arms around him. In his mind, she was alive again, smiling down at him, telling him it would all be okay. But reality was harsh, and the wind soon died down, leaving only the oppressive silence of the graveyard. Benjamin sat up slowly, his heart heavy with the knowledge that he had to return to Auntie Enkay's house. If he stayed too long, she would beat him for sure. He wiped his tears with the back of his hand and picked up the empty tray. Mama, I'll come back tomorrow, he promised, his voice barely audible. I'll tell you everything. I love you. As he turned to leave, his stomach growled loudly, reminding him that he hadn't eaten all day. He clutched his belly, trying to ignore the pain. The road home stretched out before him like a cruel reminder of his endless suffering. He had no idea how long he could endure this life, but for now, all he could do was keep moving forward. Benjamin's heart raced as he approached Auntie Enkay's house. The dim light of the oil lamp inside shone through the tiny cracks in the wooden door. His small hands trembled as he pushed it open, the creak loud enough to announce his arrival. Auntie Enkay was sitting on a wooden stool in the corner of the room, peeling yam. Her sharp eyes immediately fell on him. Where have you been? She barked, her voice cutting through the silence like a whip. I sold all the oranges, Auntie, Benjamin stammered, holding out the crumpled notes he had earned. His legs felt weak beneath him. She snatched the money from his hand and counted it quickly, her lips pursed. You call this money? She hissed, her voice dripping with disdain. You think I sent you out just to crawl back here late with this small change? I sold everything, Auntie, the money is complete, Benjamin whispered, his voice breaking. He didn't know what else to say. He had done his best, but his best was never enough for her. Before he could react, she grabbed the cane resting beside her stool and stood up. The fear in Benjamin's eyes was immediate, and he slowly stepped back, but the small room gave him no space to escape. You lazy, useless boy, she shouted, swinging the cane down on him. The first strike landed on his back, sharp and painful. He cried out, but she didn't stop. Again and again, the cane hit his fragile body, each blow pushing him closer to the edge of his strength. By the time she stopped, Benjamin was on the floor, curled up in a ball, his small frame shaking with silent sobs. Auntie Enkay threw the cane aside and spat on the ground, her face twisted in anger. Now go to bed, she snapped. And don't even think about eating anything tonight. Useless child. Benjamin didn't argue. He had learned long ago that protesting would only make things worse. Slowly, he picked himself up and limped to the corner of the living room where he usually slept. There was no mattress, no blanket, just the cold, hard floor. He lay down, his thin arms wrapped around his aching stomach, and closed his eyes, trying to block out the pain. But sleep wouldn't come. His body hurt too much, and his hunger gnawed at him like a persistent ache that wouldn't go away. The house was silent now, except for the occasional creak of wood as the wind blew outside. He could hear Auntie Enkay snoring faintly from her room, a sound that filled him with a mixture of relief and resentment. As the night dragged on, Benjamin's hunger became unbearable. He couldn't remember the last time he had eaten a proper meal. His mind wandered to the kind neighbor who lived a few houses away, an elderly woman named Mama Esther. She had always been kind to him, sometimes giving him small pieces of bread or roasted corn when Auntie Enkay wasn't looking. The thought of food was too tempting. He sat up quietly, his heart pounding in his chest. What if Auntie Enkay woke up? What if she caught him sneaking out? The thought alone sent a shiver down his spine, but his hunger was stronger than his fear. Carefully, Benjamin got to his feet and tiptoed to the door. He held his breath, his eyes darting nervously toward Auntie Enkay's room. When he reached the door, he pushed it open slowly, just enough to slip through. The cool night air hit his face, a brief relief from the stifling heat of the house. He ran as fast as his legs could carry him, his bare feet slapping against the dirt road. But he didn't stop until he reached Mama Esther's house. Standing in front of her door, he hesitated. What if she was angry at him for coming so late? What if she didn't want to help him? But his hunger pushed him forward. He raised a trembling hand and knocked softly on the wooden door. It took a moment, but soon he heard footsteps from inside. The door opened, and Mama Esther's kind, weathered face appeared in the dim light of her lantern. "Benjamin, what are you doing here at this time of the night?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. I'm sorry, Mama Esther," Benjamin whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I'm so hungry. I haven't eaten all day." Her expression softened immediately. "Oh, my poor child. Come inside," she said, opening the door wider. Benjamin stepped into her small, cozy room, his stomach growled loudly, and he looked down, embarrassed. Mama Esther noticed and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Sit down, Benji. Let me get you something to eat," she said softly. He sat on a small wooden stool near the table, his eyes following her every move as she uncovered the pot and scooped out a piece of yam. She added a little stew and placed the plate in front of him. "Eat, my child," she said, her voice tender. Benjamin didn't need to be told twice. He picked up the food with his trembling hands and began eating, tears streaming down his face as the delicious meal filled his empty stomach. It wasn't just the food, it was the kindness, the feeling of being cared for, even if only for a moment. Mama Esther watched him quietly, her eyes filled with sadness. She had seen how Auntie Enkay treated the boy, but she felt powerless to intervene. Still, she did what little she could to make his life a bit easier. When Benjamin finished eating, he looked up at her, his eyes red and swollen from crying. "Thank you, Ma," he whispered. "Thank you so much." She smiled gently and placed a hand on his head. "You're always welcome here, Benji. You're a good boy, and God sees your struggles. He will make a way for you, my child." Her words brought a small measure of comfort to his aching heart. For the first time that day, he felt a glimmer of hope, however faint. But he knew he couldn't stay. If Auntie Enkay woke up and found him missing, the punishment would be even worse. Reluctantly, he stood up. "I have to go now," he said, his voice filled with regret. "Thank you again, Ma." She nodded, her eyes heavy with concern. "Be careful, Benjamin. And remember, you can always come to me if you need anything." He nodded and stepped out into the night, his stomach full but his heart still heavy. The road back home felt even longer, the weight of his life pressing down on him like never before. As he approached the house, he paused, staring at the faint light coming from the window. He didn't know how much longer he could endure this life. But for now, he had no choice. With a deep breath, he opened the door and stepped inside, the cold floor greeting him like an old enemy. And so, Benjamin lay down once again, his body sore, his heart heavy, but his stomach finally full. As sleep began to claim him, his mind wandered to his parents, to the love and warmth he once knew. Would he ever feel that way again? He didn't know. But for now, all he could do was survive. Benjamin woke up the next morning to the familiar sound of Auntie Enkay shouting his name. His body ached from the beating he received the night before, but he forced himself to get up. He knew better than to keep her waiting. "Benji, you better come out here now, lazy boy," she yelled. Benjamin staggered in, rubbing his tired eyes. Auntie Enkay stood there with a tray of oranges, her face stern and impatient. "Take this and go sell them. And don't you dare come back without selling everything," she barked, thrusting the tray into his small hands. "If you think last night's beating was bad, try me today." "Yes, Auntie," Benjamin whispered, his voice barely audible. He adjusted the tray on his head and walked out into the morning sun. The weight of the oranges was nothing compared to the weight in his heart. As he wandered through the dusty streets of the village, he called out weakly, "Oranges for sale. Sweet oranges." But the villagers passed him by without a second glance. He tried harder, raising his voice, but it still didn't help. The day dragged on, and not a single orange was sold. By midday, the sun was high in the sky, beating down mercilessly. Benjamin's throat was dry, and his stomach growled in hunger. His feet felt heavy, and his legs trembled with exhaustion. He found a shady spot under a tree and set the tree down, tears welling up in his eyes. "What am I going to do?" he whispered to himself. He knew Auntie Enkay wouldn't listen to excuses. She would beat him again, maybe even harder this time. As the fear of going home without selling the oranges consumed him, Benjamin thought of his mother. He needed her. He needed her warmth, her love, her kind words that always made him feel better. But he was all alone. Unable to hold back his tears any longer, Benjamin picked up the tray and started walking toward the cemetery. He didn't know why, but being near his mother's grave always gave him a small sense of comfort, as if she were still watching over him. When he reached her grave, he knelt down and placed the tray beside him. The sight of the unmarked mound of earth brought fresh tears to his eyes. "Mama," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I tried, but no one bought any oranges today. Auntie Enkay is going to beat me again. I don't know what to do." His small body shook as he sobbed, his hands clutching the dry earth. "I miss you so much, Mama. Why did you and Papa leave me? I don't have anyone anymore. I don't want to stay with Auntie Enkay. She doesn't love me. She hurts me." Benjamin lay down on the ground, curling up beside the grave. The cool earth felt soothing against his burning skin. As he closed his eyes, he whispered, "Mama, please help me. I'm so tired. I just want to be with you." The exhaustion from the day overwhelmed him, and he soon drifted off to sleep. The world around him faded as he dreamt of better times, of his mother's laughter and his father's strong arms lifting him high into the air. In his dream, they were all together again, happy and safe. But when Benjamin woke up, the warmth of his dream was replaced by the harsh reality of the graveyard. The sun had dipped lower in the sky. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes, and turned to pick up his tray. What he saw made him freeze. The oranges were gone. His heart raced as he stared at the empty tray. "No, no, no," he whispered, panic rising in his chest. "Where are they? Where did they go?" He looked around frantically, but there was no sign of the oranges anywhere. Then, something else caught his eye, a small bundle of crumpled naira notes sitting neatly in the tray. His hands trembled as he picked it up. He counted the money and realized it was the exact amount he would have made if he had sold all the oranges. Benjamin's mind raced. Who could have done this? Who would take the oranges but leave the money? The graveyard was silent, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. He looked around, but there was no one in sight. The air felt strange, almost heavy, as if something beyond his understanding had just happened. He turned back to his mother's grave, his heart pounding. "Mama," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Was this you?" A chill ran down his spine as he stared at the grave. He didn't know what to think or feel. Part of him was terrified, but another part of him felt a strange sense of peace. It was as if his mother was still looking out for him, even from beyond. Benjamin sat there for a long time, clutching the money in his hands. Tears streamed down his face as a mixture of gratitude and confusion filled his heart. "Thank you, Mama," he said softly, his voice breaking. "Thank you." But the relief was short-lived. He knew he had to go back home. Aunt Enkay wouldn't believe him if he told her what had happened. She would accuse him of stealing the money or lying about selling the oranges. He didn't know how he would face her. As the sun dipped lower, Benjamin stood up and wiped his tears. He placed the money carefully in his pocket and picked up the empty tray. His legs felt heavy as he began the walk back home, his mind replaying the strange events over and over. When he reached the house, he paused outside the door, his heart pounding in his chest. The sound of Aunt Enkay's voice inside made his stomach churn with fear. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. "Benji." Aunt Enkay's sharp voice greeted him immediately. "You're late again. Did you sell everything?" Benjamin nodded quickly, holding out the money. "Yes, Auntie. I sold everything," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. She snatched the money from his hand and counted it, her eyes narrowing as she inspected the notes. "Umph. At least you didn't come back empty-handed this time," she muttered. "Now go and clean the kitchen. You're useless for anything else." "Yes, Auntie," Benjamin replied, relief washing over him. For once, she didn't beat him. But his mind was still racing, trying to make sense of what had happened at the graveyard. As he scrubbed the kitchen floor that evening, he couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary had happened. He didn't know how or why, but deep down, he felt that his mother had somehow answered his cries for help. And for the first time in a long time, Benjamin felt a tiny spark of hope in his heart. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he thought. The next morning, Benjamin woke up feeling weaker than usual. His stomach growled loudly, a painful reminder that he hadn't had a proper meal in days. He struggled to get up from the hard floor, his body aching from exhaustion. The beatings, the hunger, the fear, it was all too much for his small frame to bear. "Benji, come here." Aunt Enkay's sharp voice cut through the stillness of the house. He shuffled to her side, his feet dragging across the floor. She stood with her usual scowl, holding the tray of oranges. "Take this and go sell. If you don't come back with money today, you will see what I will do to you," she warned, her eyes narrowing. "You're just a useless boy." Benjamin didn't reply. He didn't have the strength to argue or even nod. He took the tray and balanced it on his head, his knees trembling under its weight. Without another word, he stepped out into the bright morning sun. As he walked through the village, calling out weakly, "Sweet oranges for sale," his voice barely carried. He felt invisible, as if no one cared whether he existed or not. His feet dragged along the dusty road, each step more difficult than the last. He hadn't eaten, and the hunger clawed at him like a wild animal. By midday, he couldn't go on. He set the tray down by the side of the road and sat on a small rock. His vision blurred as tears filled his eyes. The world around him seemed so big and uncaring, and he felt so small and helpless. "I can't do this anymore," he whispered to himself, his voice shaking. He wiped his face with the back of his hand and looked up at the sky. "Mama, I'm so tired. I'm so hungry." With no one else to turn to, Benjamin decided to go back to the one place that gave him some comfort, his mother's grave. He picked up the tray and slowly made his way to the cemetery. His legs felt like they would give out at any moment, but he kept walking. When he reached the grave, he placed the tray beside him and knelt on the ground. "Mama," he whispered, his voice breaking. I'm hungry. I'm so hungry. Auntie Enkay didn't give me anything to eat. I can't even sell these oranges because I don't have the strength. I wish you were here, Mama. I wish you could help me. His shoulders shook as he cried, his small hands clutching the earth again. The hunger and sadness overwhelmed him, and before long, he lay down on the cool ground, curling up beside the grave. The breeze blew the leaves of the nearby trees, and he closed his eyes, letting the exhaustion take over. When Benjamin woke up, he sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes, and turned to look at the tray beside him. His heart skipped a beat. The oranges were gone again. His tray, which had been full when he arrived, was now empty. Just like the day before, a small bundle of crumpled naira notes sat neatly in the tray. His hands trembled as he picked it up, counting the money. It was the exact amount he would have made if he had sold all the oranges. But this time, there was something else. Beside the grave, on a flat rock, sat a plate of steaming jollof rice with a large piece of fried fish. The aroma filled the air, making Benjamin's mouth water instantly. His stomach growled loudly, and his eyes widened in shock. He looked around, his heart racing. There was no one in sight. The cemetery was silent, except for the faint sound of leaves in the breeze. He turned back to the plate, his mind racing with questions. Who put this here? He whispered to himself, his voice trembling. Mama, was it you? The sight of the food filled him with both fear and wonder. He didn't understand how it was possible, but his hunger was stronger than his confusion. He reached out with trembling hands and picked up the plate. The rice was hot, perfectly cooked, with the rich, savory aroma of spices and tomatoes. Benjamin hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting around the graveyard. But there was no one. Just him, the plate of food, and his mother's grave. He whispered softly, "Thank you, Mama," and began to eat. The first bite filled his mouth with a burst of flavor, and he couldn't stop the tears that rolled down his cheeks. It had been so long since he had tasted something so delicious, so satisfying. Each bite felt like a gift, a small moment of comfort in the middle of his pain. As he ate, he felt a warmth in his chest, a feeling he couldn't explain. It was as if his mother was there with him, watching over him, making sure he was okay. The fear he had felt moments ago faded, replaced by a strange sense of peace. When he finished the food, he placed the empty plate back on the rock and sat quietly for a while. The sky was beginning to darken, and he knew he had to go home. But a part of him didn't want to leave. Sitting by his mother's grave, he felt safe, loved, feelings he hadn't felt in so long. Finally, he stood up and picked up the tray with the money inside. "Thank you, Mama," he whispered again, his voice filled with emotion. "I don't know how, but I know you're helping me. I love you." As he walked back home, his mind was filled with questions. Who was leaving the money and the food? Was it really his mother's spirit? Or was someone secretly watching over him? The thought both comforted and scared him. He didn't know what to believe, but one thing was certain, something extraordinary was happening, and it was keeping him alive. When he reached home, Auntie Enkay was waiting for him, her arms crossed and her face stern. "You're late again," she snapped. "Where's the money?" Benjamin quickly handed her the naira notes. She counted it and nodded, satisfied. "At least you did something right today," she muttered. "Now go and clean the kitchen before you sleep." "Yes, Auntie," he replied softly, his heart heavy but his stomach full. As he scrubbed the floors that evening, Benjamin couldn't stop thinking about the graveyard, the missing oranges, the plate of food. He didn't have any answers, but deep down, he felt that his mother was still with him, watching over him in ways he couldn't understand. Did you enjoy this story? What stood out for you in the story? Did you learn something? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to give us a like, subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you get notified when the next video is out. Thank you for watching.